What they were looking for are ways in which you could use this to wipe out memories from people's minds and replace them or add false memories. We were the lab rats. Arguably, we still are. To what extent have those techniques been more sophisticatedly applied? The two key elements in the MK Ultra experiments were drugs and hypnosis, usually used in combination. And what they're really trying to do in this, I mean, we don't know exactly because almost all the records of MK Ultra and its many subsidiary and allied programs, there's MK Search, there's MK Naomi, there's a whole variety of them. I mean, MK Ultra as a term is sort of begins to be phased out in the early 60s, and MK Search becomes the main one, but they're still doing the same thing. So keep in mind, this fits into the time period. It doesn't technically end until 73. Although, I guarantee you it never really ended. Okay, the name ended, but those same experiments went on. Why not? You just learn how not to make anything official about it. You don't want anything that's traceable back to a government agency. No one should be there. Should all be quite distanced from it. It's all just a bunch of weirdos doing weird stuff, which you're providing the drugs and expertise for in some cases. But that's what a lot of this stuff, I mean, the whole purpose of experiment is that you try something and see what happens to it. So what can people be induced to do? How thoroughly you can control them? And what all of this hypnosis and drug stuff is really about, people always talk about the Manchurian candidate assassin. That's one aspect of it, but the other part of it is just to see whether you can control people, particularly without them being aware that they're being controlled. The architecture, I think one way it was put is to understand the architecture of the human mind and then how to reassemble that architecture. And that idea had been around. There was an FBI, I should have brought this with me. I brought it to another interview, but it was an FBI memo from 1949. 1949, 2 years after the CIA was created, 4 years before MK Ultra technically exists, although there were earlier programs, Project Artichoke, Bluebird, Chatter, those were all the same. They were just prequels. It's the same program under different names. But it describes a meeting in 1949 at the New York apartment of a fellow by the name of Alfred Loomis, who was a scientist and researcher who did contract work for the government. But it's in a private home. And there were a group of people there. It's all part of, it was technically a meeting of what was called the Biological Warfare Committee, or Special Committee on Biological Warfare. And what they meant by biological warfare, we tend to think of it as involving germs. Well, no, what they're talking about is anything involving biological entities, the use of living things in warfare. So there are two CIA guys there, one of whom is Cleve Baxter. Cleve Baxter is Mr. Lie Detector. Almost everything in terms of the science, if there is one of lie detectors today, comes from Cleve Baxter. He's also the guy that thought plants could feel, which was part of the extension of his work with the lie detector. So you got Baxter, you got the other guy, and they're giving this kind of briefing on research that they'd been doing, and parts of the report are redacted, so you can never actually find the term that they're using for the research term itself. But as you go through it, it's very clear we get to the end of what they're talking about. They're talking about hypnotic suggestion and the uses of hypnotic suggestion. And the summary of that is very interesting, or at least it's interesting to me, because they sort of sum up the meeting by saying is that, well, hypnotic suggestion could be very useful in terms of implanting and eradicating memories. So it's conceivable. They don't say they've done this, but what they're trying to do, what they were looking for, are ways in which you could use this to wipe out memories from people's minds and replace them or add false memories. And that also the idea of deconstructing personalities and creating a completely new and separate personality. So this is what this stuff is already being discussed. The whole template for what MK Ultra will be exists years before that program actually comes along. It's just a larger elaboration of this idea. But I think that gives this 49 memo gives a very good sort of roadmap of the way that they're headed. And what was particularly eerie about this to me, eerie in the sense that it doesn't prove anything, but it's weird, is that I've later run across people. There are people who claim that this type of thing happens to them. They claim that my memories have been erased, and what I remember what I think are my memories aren't real. And usually, well, that's crazy talk. Okay. The memories I have aren't real, and my real memories have been erased, and I only get these kind of dream-like snippets of them. And this is driving me mad, which it usually does. And, they're demonstrably insane, so no one pays any attention to them. Yet, oddly, they're claiming that what was done to them is exactly what in this memo these guys are talking about doing to people. So, are those two completely unconnected things? Or is there a connection between them? You have to wonder.
It wasn't that. I mean, that was, I guess, one of the parts of, as you said, MK Ultra as a whole. I think it was called like the psychic driving stuff. It was called.
Yeah.
Where
Ewan Cameron in Canada. So they farmed this out north of the border.
It wasn't this with the schizophrenic patients where they put them in a coma and
the whole idea was to essentially erase their existing crazy personality and replace it with a new. It's a psychic lobotomy. That's largely what you're aiming for. The same results you would get from a transorbital lobotomy, you would now achieve with a much more docile. The other way it's been described is the Stepford Wives experiments, since most of the patients that were used were female. So I know that some of your listeners will not like to hear this, but one of the things that apparently they decided, rightly or wrongly, that females were much more susceptible to that type of control. Which, oddly enough, notice who most of Manson's followers were and notice other things. I mean, there are biological and physical things that we can't necessarily change about that, and call it cultural conditioning or not, but that females seem to be more accessible targets. I've also noticed that in some of the few surviving MK Ultra documents where they describe a young woman who had a fear of firearms, who's put into a hypnotic state, who was given a firearm and told to go over and shoot her friend in the head with it. And she does it. And then subsequently has no memory. So no, they weren't trying to create assassins. That was just an experiment. So that the subject in those things more often than not, tend to be female as well. So it's, I think it's fair to say that there was a lot of questionable and nefarious things which were going on, but it's all about the manipulation through hypnosis and through drugs. Psychic driving then comes, and you do these things in mental institutions because who's going to listen to anybody that complains? Right? People in an insane asylum complaining that weird things are being done to them by the doctors, who's going to believe them? It's perfect. Prisons are another place where you do it. It's not a pretty story. It is picking people who are usually have mental issues themselves, who are marginalized and vulnerable, let me pronounce that word correctly, who no one would believe if they came up with any story, and using them as lab rats. All for some sort of greater agenda. And again, this isn't something that's used, I'm not making excuses for this yet, but this I think was a portion of a large bureaucratic institution that was essentially set loose on this track and was not supervised and just went berserk. Or it was all part of some grand master plan. I'm not sure which. But I think you can simply explain it by the fact that these people were not being adequately supervised. And I think when we were talking last night, I mentioned the guy who's involved in the MK Ultra aspects and the dosing of unsuspecting people with LSD and other drugs, George Hunter White, who started out as a Federal Bureau of Narcotics agent. And I was looking for the particular quote he had about what he did. And I think it brings so much of this stuff together where I'm going to paraphrase it from memory, but I think I'll basically get it right. And he was asked about his activities. He goes, "I was but a minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I labored mightily in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun." He goes, "Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage, all with the sanction of the all-highest?" And that, I think, explains as to why people would do that. You know, it involves ego and the rest of it. You could do whatever you wanted to anyone with impunity.
Yeah, that's the name of the game, whether we like it or not. And again, I think making that distinction between things being done more likely by a very small number of people and making sure that we don't paint an entire agency or even, again, conflate that with a nation's people. They're not the same thing, and that doesn't make you a CIA apologist to say that, or any sort of apologist for any sort of.
Well, it's not the American people. The American people were the ones who were victimized by the whole thing.
Right.
We were the lab rats. Arguably, we still are. Just perhaps with more. To what extent have those techniques been more sophisticatedly applied? So the question always comes down to, when did everybody decide this was a bad idea and we're going to stop doing it? Personally, I don't think it was. Why wouldn't you continue with it? I mean, you're always told that it didn't achieve anything, didn't work. But if it did work, you couldn't admit it. Because if you said that it worked, then you would be giving away to the other side that it worked, and that would then encourage them. Or you say that it worked to encourage them. Remember, it's disinformation. You can claim that you performed experiments that worked simply to lull your opposition into wasting their time in that direction because they don't want you to get ahead of them. But then if you actually stumble across something that would be really important and secret, then you must keep it secret, which means denying that there was anything that was ever achieved out of it. So the ultimate thing is that while people talk about MK Ultra at the time, all the time, we have only a very limited understanding of what went on in that program, which stretched on for almost 20 years, and which involved dozens of subsidiary programs investigating all kinds of things, one feeding off the other one. So what actually goes there, what the long-term legacy of that is impossible to say because you never know what happened in the first place.
What's up, guys? Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the interview. If you got anything out of this video at all, please like the video, leave me a comment, tell me what you thought of the video, tell me who you'd like to see on the show. I really appreciate the support. It goes a long way on these platforms, as you guys know. Most importantly, I have some excellent interviews coming up in the future that I'm really, really excited about. So please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of them. But that's it. Thank you for your support. I really appreciate it, and hope to see you again soon.